This conference will now be recorded. This conference will now be recorded.
All right, so we are in week 7, which is exciting and also extremely scary because that means we're almost halfway through our semester. And tonight we're just going to be working with adding text, leader lines, making PDFs, so creating more D-size sheets within our AutoCAD, and then starting the shell of our reflected ceiling plan. So everything that I'm going to be talking about can be found under assignment 7. And I also have some added reading for you. I'll have to cross-check this reading when I get home. So far, the different, like we had 2017 and now the book's 2018, but all the pagination has been the same. So I'll check and see if this is right. I know that I want you to read the sections of chapter 4 that's about line weights, annotation, and multi-leaders. Somebody asked me, will we really ever use our book again? Did I buy it just to do these first couple of exercises? And the way that you'll use your book in this class continuing on is to see a different way of going about things, and they're much more architecturally based, whereas this is more conceptually based. In my classroom, I'm giving you bits and pieces and saying you could do it this way, and this way, but this is kind of, they have a streamline, very specific to the trade of architecture. So those color delineations within CAD and saying red should be a type of thickness that you always use in this situation. Being that specific is something that comes with your book. And I think it's a really valuable way to look at it, especially if you're thinking of joining an architectural firm of any kind, instead of, say, like a furniture store or a contract design field position. So it gives a good point of view, and I think it's worth reading. So that's just one part of our homework. Again, I'll check and make sure that the pagination is correct. Or you could maybe check for me if any of you have your books just hanging out with you at home tonight. Quick, see if 436 seems about right for line weights. Down below that, it says that you have a number of documents that you need to download. So we're going to download our reflected ceiling plan, floor plan, site plan, building section. And a lot of the information on these will look familiar to you because we're just bringing what we already have into our model space, into our layout space, those white pages that we can click on in the bottom of our AutoCAD. So coming into our layouts, I'll call this tonight, I'll end up calling it layout, or I also tend to call it paper space as I'm talking. And what represents that is the blaringly white screen. So it's white like a piece of paper. It goes by both names, layout and paper space. But this one is the one you don't have, although it looks familiar because it's basically the footprint of your house with a little bit different hatching and labeling to represent the very basic, lacking any type of lighting, reflected ceiling plan. If we go back into our assignment, our next one would be the floor plan. And you'll notice it has some call outs with leader lines and text. It's labeled down near the bottom of the page. It's a nice justification with the building here. Our pipe chases have labels, and we have some hatching. Your site plan, not a lot has changed, but there is a needed change in sizing to fit it most likely on our sheet tonight, which we'll talk about. It should be 1/8 instead of 1/4, even though the PDF says 1/4. It just never got changed, and I fill this in manually. So if you want to include the river drive portion and your river on this side, we're going to have to scale that down. So we'll return to our layouts and look at how to scale something when it's not 1/4 inch. And your section is going to make it on its own PDF. And in this class, we're working at building a sheet set, and eventually we'll have a title page, and you'll have all of these different PDFs that you can order in a file. So it'll say, this is the building section, my floor plan, my furniture plan, so on and so forth. All my details will end up having about 12 sheets altogether. And this last one won't make sense until we get probably about 30 minutes into the video, but it's a text scale chart that's going to help us go between paper space and model space and knowing how to plot our text sizes correctly and what the difference is between annotative text and common text. So I'm just going to keep all these thousands of tabs open so we can refer back to them. And I'm going to go ahead and start creating my reflected ceiling plan. And I'll click on this guy. So this just talks about how to hatch your reflected ceiling plan. We notice that interior of the windows and doors, instead of showing the true symbols for windows and doors, we have this diagonal ANSI hatching. So does anybody know why that is? Why am I not seeing windows and doors on this plan? If this is my reflected ceiling plan.
Because you're looking up at the ceiling.
Because you're looking up at the ceiling, and so the cut line is high and above those windows. Correct. So it's anything that's falling on the ceiling. Super simple answer. That's what I'm looking for. But just to get our orientation with this plan, basis looking at a furniture plan and a floor plan, or even looking at when we were drawing in our kitchens, thinking about seeing NKBA, those top cabinets being hard lined instead of dash, because those are thinking 5 foot and above is going to be shown as solid. So when we get into the reflected ceiling plan, we're looking up and we're ignoring everything below. So we're just going to hatch it out and ignore. So this will tell you your instructions. It's a lot like that section drawing. So make a new layer, hatching. That's too common of a layer. I have right now open in my AutoCAD. I'm going to use Miss Sarah's. I had hers up on my screen tonight. And a number of you, like we've looked at your hatching layers. So some of you have hatching section walls, hatch site plan, and then just basic hatch, which I'm assuming represents her walls in her house here. So we'll turn it off and see. Yep. So we're going to now create our reflected ceiling plan, but we don't want to have to completely redraw everything from scratch. So the great thing about Masar putting in all this legwork is we can turn her initial hatch on. Maybe we want it on. Maybe that's something we want to keep. Well, is that a good idea if I return and I look at my reflected ceiling plan? Well, the only problem right now for a person who is not in space planning is our reflected ceiling plan doesn't have any rooms in it. So it's a little bit different this week. And so for Masara's reflected ceiling plan, if we go back, she's already created all of her walls, which actually changes how the ceiling functions and operates because it might have a different height in here versus in here. So for this week, what we really have to get is that everybody has the hard-lined walls hard-lined and the windows and doors are all in the same type of hatching pattern. So she could copy everything that she has in the center, but she's also going to have some additional information. I'm going to draw it as if I'm drawing it to match my PDF here and not include hers. And we'll continue on from there. And maybe we can ask questions about the difference between the two plans. So she has all this nice work to this side. I'm going to move it up so that I can do a clean copy right over, just as when I was trying to understand this section drawing about the building. It's easy for us to make the copy of our full house over and then use the section adjacent to it and draw through the house. It'll all make sense in a second to complete our reflected ceiling plan. I know for sure we all want our patio and deck off. So lucky for us, we've got those on layers that are easy to toggle on and off. We'll take the patio off and we'll take our deck off. And then for now, she should have her windows on a layer and doors on a layer that she just turns off just like that. So we've got a lot of information off right now. If in this situation, and let's check and see, this is on AWA, and this is on AWA. If we have this extra line in here, we're not going to need it. We could copy it over and delete it out after we've done the copy. That way we're not messing up our original plan. So we'll turn that stuff off and then we'll get her kitchen items off. And then let's see, what other things can we turn off? If she has any equipment, probably anything that's not associated with the house that I want to copy, even if it's a layer that I know isn't being represented right now, just so we can clear up all the extra junk. Dimensions could be off, her labels, layer 1, lighting, this guy, her section. We'll keep the section plain over there with no dimensions on, actually. Site plan, title block, and then all her furniture can go off and fixtures can go off. And her main solid hatch we can keep in, and then I might delete pieces of it off to the side. And core unchangeable, we're all good on. So let's see, what are these pieces falling on? Oh, appliance. So they're just too high up on my list. I wasn't visible for me to turn it off. And then what's this guy falling on? He's on, I don't know what he's on. Escape off. He's kind of on his own secret thing, I guess. So let's imagine that he doesn't exist. When we do the copy, we'll just delete him off. I've got enough information off, and she's got her stairs, and they don't connect to her ceiling, but we don't want them to go. So she'll just, if this was her, she could just delete this in the copy, and she'll know that she'll be okay. So this is quite a bit of information, but enough that I won't have to redraw. So I'm going to select it all, and I'm going to copy it to the side. And I'm going to pull it way over to the side so I can toggle some layers back on to show you that when you do a big copy like this and you've turned everything off, you don't take any of the layers that are off with it. So for instance, if I now turn on my patio, it's only on this plan, but it is safely on that plan. I didn't move anything in that move. And this plan didn't keep the copy of the patio because it was toggled off. So at this point, I could say, certainly I'm not going to have my stair and whatever pieces of information these are, but I would have all of the walls interior in here for my plan. And then I could say, at this point, I could delete this extra line because if I look back at my PDF, it's fully hatched in through all of the windows and doors. And if I have the extra line, it's going to interrupt my hatch. So if I had a tile line or threshold of that door, I wouldn't want to carry that over. And then I would want to close it off so that when I create the hatches in between there for all of my windows and doors, I'm good. You might notice if we refer back to the plan in here, we have a thickness here and a thickness here for a window, and it looks like in here we're just missing that window's thickness. I'm going to, for posterity's sake, just fill them in to be this general thickness instead of trying to measure anything and make sure I'm perfectly right. But that window's thickness is about this whole jut out in here. And if it's any thinner, we at least want to have the full glass included. So when we go to hatch, we can hatch it out. So I've got the majority of items there, and maybe at this point I could get rid of any extra thresholds, like I said, from my doors in here, because those would interrupt up our hatch. I know a lot of you kind of have that within there. And then for the fireplace, you can notice that we've kind of solid this off because we're not going to see the gap that's created for me to put things into my fireplace. I'm too high above it. I'm just reflecting what's connecting, items that are running directly into the ceiling, and that would be my chimney as it's leaving. So I could go back into my AutoCAD and say, let's see if it just didn't copy a portion of this off, and it might just not be showing up. I might have turned it off, but I'm just going to say eventually I want to have my whole fireplace, and maybe I'll use a rectangle tool to make it quicker in this situation. So rectangle tool, and I'm going to make sure my snaps are on, endpoint, midpoint, and I'm just going to say this is about where that fireplace is in here, and stretch it down so that I have something I can hatch more solid to fill it in. So let's go back to our PDF. I'm going to kind of Control+ because I bet your eyes are crying over there. It says, for solid, simply select solid hatch for anything that might not have copied or you want to redo, and hatch it with solid. We know how to do that. And for angled, we're going to do ANSI 131 and make the hatch pattern scale 12 and the rotation 0. So pattern scale 12 and the rotation 0. Before I move on, at this point, I would say for what we're doing with this reflected ceiling plan, it's its own plan, but it's never going to show up on our floor plan. Like they're never going to be on the same sheet together. So even though this hatch that she has is on hatch, she could technically leave her solid plan on hatch. If she really wanted to, just for organization, and some people will want to, create a new layer and call it reflected ceiling plan hatch, because we said hatches take a lot of thought. So to have two sets of them on at once, your computer will run slower. And so if you're having issues with slowness, then you would want to do it, in fact. But I'm going to leave it on hatch tonight because I'm okay, because whereas like the kitchen might need to turn on and off in a floor plan, we're not going to have these two plans conflicting with each other. They're completely separate. So you could complete a reflected ceiling plan hatch, or just leave it on the hatch that you copied over. But then I would say over here, for the second hatch, we might want that to be separated out and on that new reflected ceiling plan hatch. So I'm not going to fight you on the differences between these two hatches. If I go into my layer properties, and just basic review of how to create our layer, we click on our little Starshine paper set and we say hatch so that it's alphabetical. We can go to hatch quickly and we will call it RCP, reflected ceiling plan. And so if I make this active and I come out, I could then start hatching all of these areas in here that represent windows and doors. And we want to go to our hatch, which is in our draw panel. And by clicking on it, making active, it'll bring up our next series of possibilities. We said 131, and we want this pattern scale to be 12 and the angle to be 0. And then we're just going to pick an internal point. And hopefully they're all quick to hatch. We'll see if there's any problem areas. And then I'm going to make you a deal if you happen to have problem areas, because you've done a lot of work so far and it's a well done, my good and faithful servant situation where we're going to cheat the system a little bit if we have to. So let's say some of you, after you did the copy, it was somehow messy and this wasn't like a nice solid line and this hatch was working out funky to where you click in this box and it doesn't recognize your closed hatch. And so you keep having to draw extra lines and connect things, and it's a really long, drawn out process. I'm okay with you having double lines because of the solidified hatch. In this situation, we're not going to notice if you're doubling up. So you could take a rectangle. You would want it to be on your A wall layer. So our wall should still be on a wall layer if you're going to add the rectangles in. And just draw a rectangle so that the hatch knows to end there without going and drawing one segment that connects to another and it's just click, click, click. Just draw rectangles if you need to in the spots where the rectangles aren't reading by your hatch. So I'm going to finish out my hatch and it should maintain those properties if I click back into it, that 12 and the 0 angle rotation. And I've already hatched around the entirety of the outside. And it's beginning to look a lot like what I see here. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So that was 2 really easy, simple steps: solid hatch, copy and move, and then our diagonal hatch for all the windows and doors. But now we have to go back to one of these PDFs. See, try to remember where it's at. It's my 4th over from AutoScale that has the added notes that go with my reflected ceiling. So let's talk about what we're even looking at right now. We know that the tallest peak of our house is at the center between the columns, and that peak is 20 feet. Now there's an error on here, and I don't have a PDF corrector, so this peak tool should actually be drawn facing here because it should be pointing out and labeling the peak, which I'll do it that way on the plan tonight so you're not confused by this and you have the video to refer to. The slope is saying this is the peak at 20, and then these sides both slope down from there. That lets me know that it's not like one side is flat over here and 20 foot high, and then it slopes on this side. It should be, it slopes on both sides. And we show a slope by having the arrows that point from the peak to the wall that the slope is created with. Now we know on the other side of the columns, our ceiling is flat and about, I want to say at that 8-foot height, and then it drops down where we have the ceiling hit and connecting with the roof, which brings that elevation lower. So if I go back into my AutoCAD, this is where we start to see how this section drawing is going to help us figure out what we're looking at in our reflected ceiling plan. And then it's kind of Masara, the people who are in our space planning classes, decision of what they want to do with these ceiling spaces for each individual room once they start breaking it into chunks like this. So if I draw a line from here, which Masara's nicely, she's lined this all up, you know, with our house, and I take my line from the very center peak of her house and I draw it through, I can see that that quickly gives me a line to represent the peak of my house in here. But we know that in reality, when we come 1, 2, 3, 4 over, there's a dropped beam that ends that highest height right in through the middle of the house. We don't have the continuation of the 20 foot all the way up near the entry in here. It starts to flatten out even back and around on this side. So we could put in this dropped beam and end this just by drawing 2 simple lines connecting off our pipe chases here and then coming to the end of this pipe chase and evening it out. So if I go into AutoCAD and I have my line tool, and for these series of lines, you could really have them on a wall. Like I'm saying, they're architectural lines that are talking about walls hitting into ceiling. Now the beam is a little bit different because it's this extra thing. It's this oddity on its own. It's the only thing like itself on the plan. The dropped beam means that it drops lower than the 20 foot and it's just this wooden beam, and I'm going to show you it in my SketchUp file. So what we're seeing happen in here is this dropped beam right here that falls lower than my 20-foot peak. So if I pull a line on my axis and I make sure that it's straight, we'll see if I find my right axis. There we go. And I come out, you can see when I rotate it, there's that 20 feet up here and then drops down to, I think it said like the 10-foot height, something like that, are these beams that go all the way and run the walls of that center area. So we're representing this beam even though it doesn't connect to the ceiling, because it's still high enough in elevation that it matters. And it could affect things like our lighting that might hang right above it or run through it. So we could draw this as dashed technically if you want to, or you can just draw it as solid. They have it drawn as solid in the original book, and that's why I leave it that way, because I'm trying to be a rule follower. But it's technically dashed because it is falling, not physically touching perfectly with the ceiling. So it's kind of this special element that they've added to our plan. That's not a normal thing. I could take this line then that's representing my peak and pull it in because we know it ends before the dropped beam. And then with this line, if I wanted to, I could drag it, or we always know that it's a possibility to trim things. So we'd have to have a line to trim it from. And in this situation, it doesn't look like it copied the interior line. It only copied the outside, and I know it won't let me trim from a hatch, so I'm gonna have to stretch it. And you might notice little messy, silly things like that with your plan. So here, if I get in really close, I could grab the line, but it was hard for me to grab it to get that quick trim. So now I've got this part and my beam, and it's going pretty speedily along. We'll go back out. So aside from the peak, the beam, which I've shown you in 3 dimensions and on plan, we have some type of slope. In order to draw our slope, we just return to our AutoCAD, we grab our line tool in the upper left-hand corner, and our slope we know from Masara's lovely section drawing is right here. So that's where it changed from fully flat ceiling at that 8-foot height to start sloping because of the roof cutting through the outside edge. So I want to start my line where that flat ceiling meets with the roof on this side and pull my line using my green axis down into this space. And we can pull it all the way through just for the sake of seeing. We know that it originally, I lost my line because I clicked too early. We know that it does run through the whole building. It's up to Masara, like if she wants to keep it or level it out or lower the ceilings in certain spaces. So there's my line, and that represents my slope on that side. We do the same thing for the slope on the other side. We come to where the ceiling connects with that 18-foot flat piece, and we pull our line down and across. And then we could actually use the trim tool and select portions. So we'd want to do this interior line and this interior line. I'm going to get it this time. I'm going to zoom in and say enter, and we could cut that and cut that. And then we could do it on the bottom, or we could always use the nodes. So lots of ways to skin our cat, but we are going to try them both so you remember them both. So that's telling me that's where this is lower on my plan, and this is where it's flat, and that's what all the notes are indicating, flat until it's lower and we have a slope. And for this, if you really want to, I think it would be easier to read, although I know the book did it like this with arrows and it doesn't tell you the slope. You could have the straight part of the arrow, like an arrow starting from the peak, and then the word slope, and then an arrow on this other side. So it's just like a nub on this end and the arrow. At least that would tell you the direction of the slope is sloping down, for instance. But it is common to show it like this with an arrow on both sides, just telling you the slope exists here, and then refer back to your section drawing. I wanted to be clear too that I think myself, I've intermittently been calling this elevation just because that's what pops into my head, but it is in fact a section drawing, right? Where we have the full cut through of the entire building. It's the entirety of the building section. So that's a little different than a true elevation. And I want to be clear about that terminology and break it out. So we have this line and this line. Does that make sense? Do we need to explore our model anymore between this class and those of you in space planning? You've got an idea of what's going on. All right, I'm going to take your silence as approval and I will move on then. So I will say that you want to consider, though, certain things now that, especially because it's kind of nice, right? We pulled over Masara's walls in here. So we'd say if she had a bed in here and she put her master bedroom under here, there'd be this kind of slope. So if the bed was halfway under the slope, is that the appeal that she wants, or does it feel claustrophobic to have the slope? The ceilings are actually pretty high, but it is lower on this side, and you might not account for that initially. Or let's look at her, I'm going to turn her kind of her appliances and maybe some of her bathrooms and stuff on so that we could see it on the plan really quick. Maybe equipment, if I could. So we could think about this ceiling is sloped here over her kitchen, and I wish I had them. I know I had them over here. I almost wish I hadn't turned all her layers off. I'm going to undo that all. But she knows over here, like if she has a toilet here and maybe a shower here, did she consider the fact that having the shower here, she has to deal with the slope in the ceiling? And it's going to be a big change in how you interact with the plan and the reality of the plan. All right, so let's continue on. I'll snap this back into place. So now we'd have to know how to make notes. I've covered everything pretty much in entirety besides the multi-linear and the notes on that page. So I'm going to take a quick break and talk about the rest of the sheets that we need to correct so that we can complete one whole sheet with its entirety of text and lines. So we had down here in the bottom layout 1, layout 2, and arch D. Your arch D was, for now, we've been using it as a quick instant print area, but we really want to have for ourselves a template that's going to have a title block and a viewport that we can just make tons of copies of so we have most of our sheet set completed tonight. So I'm going to do a right click down here on her Arch D layout, and I'm going to do from template. And we want to go into, let me see, sheet sets, architectural imperial, Arch D, okay. And I just want to see, it should have its title block on it. Hold on. I'm going to delete out some of our extra layouts. Delete, okay. And I'm going to delete this, and I'm just going to give it one more try because I know for me, when I have my files, it always has this nice title block to the side. And I'm going to check her layers really quick to make sure that it's not just turned off. So, or frozen on this side, and that's why it's not showing, or frozen on here, although it doesn't look like it is. Title block, there, boom, okay. So that's a good thing to know. Your layers function just as they would in model space in your paper space. So when I went through and turned every layer off, it turned her title block off. So in reality, she had the nice Arch D that we needed to do the copy of from the beginning, but secretly under her layer properties, I had turned title block off with the rest of the layers. So turning title block on, she has a viewport and she has her title block the way that we would want it. Let's look down here. We've got everything in here is good. I'm going to double click out of here so I can zoom in and out. For a minute there, I wasn't able to zoom in and out because I was double clicked into this viewport. And when you're clicked in, you're then zooming in on the model space instead of zooming in on the paper space. So if you want to navigate in paper space, this whole piece of paper, you have to be double clicked out of your viewport to control your panning and your zooming. So now that I have a nice copy of this, I am going to just pull up for myself the floor plan. I'm going to mostly center it in the viewport first. I had to be double clicked in the viewport in order to move it around, so I'm double clicked. And then I'm going to come down to the lower right, and I'm going to choose my scale to be 1/4 of an inch equals a foot, which the majority of your plans are going to be because they fit, and that's the common scale that architects would read them in. So this is what it looks like, and I have it fairly well centered in the middle of my paper. And I'm going to double click out of it. So when I double click out of it, I now can see it nicely centered in my page, and I'm not messing it anymore with its scale. Its scale has disappeared from the lower right hand. If I double click into it and I do any movement whatsoever, I've now ruined the scale. So I'm going to once again set it back at 1/4 inch equals a foot. I'm holding my middle click down so that I can pan with my hand, and then I'm going to lock it this time. And we're going to talk about this tool. So in the lower right-hand corner, there's a lock mechanism right down here on near my scale. And if I left click it, now, even though I'm double clicked into my viewport, it's like telling me, I'm sorry, you can't move this. You decided this is the scale and where you want it on the paper. So that's a nice thing to do. I could still edit things in my model space. I deleted an entire wall. I just can't physically pan and zoom in, making it so that I'm losing the scale that I want to stay at. So let's undo that because we do want to keep all of our walls in reality. So you want to lock your viewports for the most part every time you feel you've placed them in a satisfactory location. And now that we have one good copy of our ArchD with the title block, we're going to use it to create the rest of our drawings, our site plan, reflected ceiling plan, etc., etc. So the easiest way to go about doing that without going deep into the files again is right-clicking and then say Move or Copy. Then we left-click on ArchD, and then we left-click Create a Copy, and then we click OK. And you'll notice down here now there's an ArchD too. So we are going to go ahead and rename ArchD2 by left-clicking on it, doubly, Reflected Ceiling Plan. Or you could just say RCP if you'd understand that. Reflected Ceiling Plan. And then I just left-click off to complete the name. Then I'm going to come back on here, the original ArchD, and I'm going to right-click and I'm going to do Move or Copy. ArchD, create a copy, OK. And I have ArchD2 again because I've already renamed my reflected ceiling plan. So I'm going to double click on here to get into the rename, and I'm going to name this Site Plan. And then I'm going to left click out. And I'm going to continue to do that for the remainder of my sheets. So I can't just click the plus like I did. I have to right click on ArchD, move or copy, ArchD, create a copy, OK. And I will have a new sheet at the bottom. And I'm going to name this one Building Section. All right. So I get through all of my sheets and continue. And if you go back out to your homework, when I come to assignment 7, you can see it says download and replicate the following documents. You know how many to do and continue because it'll say you want reflected ceiling plan, floor plan, site plan, building section. Floor plan is the only one that we're missing because I haven't renamed it down here from being ArcD. So this one's representing my floor plan. I can double click and say floor plan and left click off. All right, so now we have all of our plans, and now we just need to go into each of them, and we'll do some of these at different times in the evening. But for instance, if this was my building section, I need to double click. I have to unlock my lock because I don't want to have my floor plan in view. And then I would want to come into my building section, and I'm looking for my right-hand toolbar, my navigation is missing. So I'm going to look up here in my Express tools really quick for my view cube, and my navigation bar on. We'll see if it'll come up for me. If not, I'll have to do it a different sneaky way, which is totally fine, but I want it to pop up, and I don't know if it's just hiding in the background somewhere for me or off to the side. I might have to reopen CAD here in a minute to get it back up on the screen. Usually it would do it just by clicking on my navigation bar here. Enter an option on. Okay, and make this bigger. Okay, but you can see we want to start pulling things to each of their sections, getting them ready. Site plan, for instance, we do the unlocking, and then we can scroll out, and our site plan We have it turned off with its layers. So I can turn things just on in my sheets that might be off in my model space just by controlling them with their layers in here. But for now, I'm going to do it in the model space because it's kind of a discussion for another night. So if I come back into my model space and I make this bigger and I go home and I come into my layers, we're going to turn on all of her site layers. So site plan. And then I am going to turn on her site hatch. And we can go back into that site plan tab in the lower left, and we can kind of zoom out until we see her site plan. And this is the one that if we kind of center it on our screen, and then we put in a 1/4 inch, it's going to get rid of some of the information about our site. So technically, we could almost stretch our viewport size, which is the box around this, to be bigger and just barely fit the information. But a lot of you in 108 are going to have information that makes it big enough that you want to change the size so you can fully see everything on plan. And we'll even have a little office building, and it might be really close to the edges in here. So we're going to make it 1/8 instead of a 1/4 because that's a better readable site plan size. And we're going to center it, and then we're going to lock it. So this plan, the site plan, should be 1/8 size, not 1/4 inch size. All right, so now I'm going to go back to my internet instructions.
To get everything going.
I'm going to go
Then you can play Minecraft.
back to them. I'm muting you, Ashley, because I can hear you. So I just physically muted you. I'll unmute you here in a second. And if we go back out to our internet, we've created each of these Ds, and we've begun to center all the information in them. We have to learn something then about our text and how to scale it appropriately. So sorry. I'm going to talk about a number of things. We have that scale chart that was up here, right here, AutoCAD scale chart. So I'm going to keep that open. And then within each of the plans, we could see we have certain text. So the building section, we have a big label on it. For site plan, we have multiple labels. For our reflected ceiling plans, we have labels with arrows. If I go back and reopen my AutoCAD scale, and then we open up AutoCAD, let's go back into our model, toggling in the lower left-hand corner, and kind of pull up to our floor plan for now. So I know it's my floor plan, although it looks a little bit sad because of all the layers being off in here. At this point, I can mostly turn back her layers because our reflected ceiling plan has copied over only the necessary information, and we can live with anything else being on for the rest of the examples, and it might help you to see them. Except our image layer, we don't need that guy. Okay, labels even, okay. So, how do we do text? We've done some very basic text, but the text that we deal with in the field can sometimes be annotative. And annotative text is probably the most confusing thing that I have to legally explain to you because it says it in our course guide. So annotative text changes with our annotative scale. So for instance, right now, our workspace is 1:1, but you know from drafting that you have your entire architectural scale, so you could have a 1/4 inch equals a foot, and so on and so forth. And so annotative text is what shows up on a printed piece of paper where you could scale it out with that physical architectural scale. Text that exists in this 1:1 model space can be that is non-annotative and not dependent on any type of scale, has inch 1:1 measurements. All of that is just talk until I try to show you a physical side-by-side comparison. So in order to do that, we have to create both a notes that is annotative and a notes that is standard. So I am going to come up into my annotation tab, the third tab in, annotate, and I am going to add to or edit my multi-line text. So let's see if I've got my text tool and I click on notes. So we're going to click on notes at the top. The drop-down menu comes down. And you should all have something so far that is labeled notes within here. This one was already active for Masara, and we're going to use it, and we're only going to change the styling of her initial notes, and it's non-annotative. So if I have her notes active here, and then I go to Manage Text Styles, we can see it's blue and highlighted. I'm going to change the font name to be City Blueprint. City Blueprint. And after I've changed it, I'm going to apply it, and I'm going to just set current again to be fair, and then I'm going to close it. But before I close it, you can see it says annotative and the box is unchecked. So that's a good indicator it's not annotative. I'm going to close out of it. And so now when I go to use this text tool by clicking on multi-line text, and I'm just going to zoom in and come right here. We can see when I go to type, I created a little window. I went click, click to create a window to type within. We've tried that out in here with different labels. And it's telling me it has a 6-inch size. And so with it at its 6-inch size, let's see what our text looks like now. So we'll call this pipe chase, just like that. And it's pretty. It's got this nice effect to it, just like this text in here is very similar. That might even be a city blueprint text as well, or it might have changed when I changed the notes. It changed all of my text with it, which is one thing to consider. And I love it because it is a very hand-drafted type of text font. So this is a fine font, but what is the 6 inches telling me? Well, if I go home and I grab my measure tool and all sizing in text, and this is fun just to know about text. So like if you have a serif font or different fonts graphically, they're measured in size by their uppercase letters. So I'm going to pick the bottom of a P, and this isn't going to be like a fine science, but you can see that it's snapping node to node would be about 6 inches for my uppercase P when it's 1-to-1. So that means when I'm in a 1-to-1 space, just like if I were to print from this space where it says 1-to-1, we could print an entire document that we could lay out on the grass, and this wall would be whatever it is over here, 54 foot wide. And this letter would be the size of my bottom of my palm to the top of my middle finger. It'd be 6 inches long in real life. That's what the 6 inches represents, a 6-inch size in a 1-to-1 scale environment. All right, and if I have text like this that's non-annotative, I can do whatever I want with it. I can move it, I can copy it. I don't have to worry about it. Non-annotative text is a happy text. It lives its life vicariously and does whatever it wants to do. We could scale it. Zoom, zoom. We can make it big, we can make it small, whatever we want to do because it's not annotative. But annotative text is an angry guy that doesn't like much done with it. So it's it's your choice. Annotative text is kind of this very specific thing that architects will use that is easy to set up each drawing. So like kitchen and bath drawings are done at 1/2-inch scale. If you have a text that's meant to print perfectly whenever you do 1/2-inch scale and you set that all the time in your templates, then you don't have to worry about resizing anything or having this, and you know it's going to print beautifully for you. So that's why we have annotative text. But non-annotative text is malleable. You can play with it and do whatever you want. It's just text as a jumping off point. And in 1-to-1 space, you can tell what it's represented as under its measurements. So we've got one type. This is notes non-annotative. I'm going to move him back up here. Boop. And I'm going to come up to my Annotate tab, and I'm going to create a new one based off of my initial notes. So if I drop down the menu again, and I do, it's active, my Manage Text Styles, I'm going to do New, and I'm going to do my style to be Notes Annotative. It might not like the dash, we'll find out. Okay, it does like the dash. All right, so I have Notes Annotative, and it's City Blueprint, but I'm going to check Annotative for its actual sizing. And then I'm going to click Set Current. Yes, and I'm going to click Close. And you can tell because of the little blue ruler tip, it looks like the end of your architectural ruler, that it is in fact an annotative text style. If I go back and grab notes, notice there is no little blue annotative symbol. That matches similar to the blue annotative symbols down here in the lower right-hand corner. I'm going to swap back over to that notes annotative, and I'm going to use it and talk a little bit about the chart. So if I left click on my my multi-line text, I'm going to click OK after that prompt came up. So it says you're in a one-to-one environment. Is that okay? I clicked OK. And I am going to left click to start a box and left click to finish a box. And right now it says 6 inches. So before that was okay. So I'm going to type pipe chase and see what happens. Well, not pip chase, that makes no sense. So right now it seems like it's okay, even though it is annotative. This might be a caveat of the newest version. I can't wait for this. All right, so it's annotative text and I'm using it and it matched with that one, which is a little bit strange to be honest. Let's look at our chart. So our chart tells us that if we are using annotative text, and we have a 1/4 inch scale, and we want something to be 1/8 inch text plotted height. We would pull over at a 1/4 inch scale, that looks like 6. So before when we saw 6, we would say, well, usually if we have a 6 inch in the regular model space text, and we're using an annotative text, that would tell me that my annotative text height is going to be 1/8 inch. So if I come in and I say, I'm going to use this multi-line text and I'm going to draw it, I want to, and it is on notes annotative, put in 1/8 inch. And I'm going to type in pipe chase. This might be the thing that I watched my video from last year, and we had students who were saying they had this little teeny tiny font, and I think I'm starting to see why. So hold on. I'm going to pause the video real quick, in fact.
This
Thank you.
conference will now be recorded.
Always remind me of that if I've turned it off. All right.
I think it might have just cut out. I don't know if any, or maybe it was just me that cut out for a few seconds there before.
No, she's right, because I turned it off when I was noticing the problem with the text, but I'll re-explain it, but now with the instructions, so it's fine. I don't feel like we've missed very much in reality. So we're going to walk through how to use the chart every time. Okay, so if we come in and we're going to get that little label down here said reflected ceiling plan. It said it was a 1/2 inch, but that's for a plan that we know is going on 1/4 inch scale paper. So for tonight, you're going to want to change your scale down here to be a 1/4 inch so that you can use your new notes annotative. And then we're going to left click on our multi-line text. We're going to make our box, which allows us to change the height up here. And we're going to make it a 1/2 inch, enter. And then we're going to type reflected ceiling plan. And for big labels, I usually always do all caps, reflected ceiling plan because that's the standard for hand drafting instead of doing caps on the beginnings of letters and then lowercase throughout the rest of the word. And then I'm going to left click off. So we can see that this is a 1/2 inch scale. What I'm trying to tell you is if I go into my paper space and I double click and I make sure I'm at a 1/4 under here, I have to unlock to find my new reflected sitting plan. I center it. I could relock it so I get it in space. And I come down to my text and I get out of my model space. So I'm on the piece of paper. I know I am because I'm scrolling in and the box is unhighlighted. And then I check a measurement using my home tab and my measure tool of my text. If I printed at a 1/4 inch this piece of paper, the text is a 1/2 an inch tall using my architectural scale. So it lets me know my printed height annotated. If I wanted to, I don't have to do that. And if I look back at the scale chart, I can come to my chart and say, okay, so this is my drawing scale. And the majority of the time we're dealing with a 1/4. The only time otherwise is that the 1/8 inch plan that we'll be doing for our site plan so everything fits. So most of the time we're starting in this point in our column. And then we're saying, I tell you in the instructions, your text height is 1/2 inch plotted. But this yellow text up here always means you annotative notes. So if I say 1/2 inch, I'm talking about annotative notes height, and that's what you'd use. If you don't want to use annotative notes and you want to use notes, you come over to a 1/4 meeting up with a 1/2 inch and you find the number 24. And that tells you the 1-to-1 inches measurement in model space. So I'm going to go back out to model space and I am going to prove to you what that looks like using non-annotative notes. So if I come up to annotate and I go into just plain notes, notice there's no little cute blue architectural ruler. So I've switched it to notes. There shouldn't be a little blue architectural symbol here. And I'm going to, just because I have the memory of a goldfish, come back here, a 1/4, a 1/2, so 24 inches. 24 inches. I'm going to change this in here after I start typing. So I'm going to draw my box. I'm going to go doot, doot. And then I'm going to come up to the text size and backspace and say 24 inches, enter. And then I'm going to type reflected ceiling plan. And then click off. Notice they're identical. And I can tell that if I measure this, it should be 24 inches because it's talking about its height. And I just didn't start from the perfect bottom, but we see 11, 1, 11, and 5/8. It's close enough. It's 24 inches tall in a 1-to-1 drawing model space. No matter what I change the scale down here to, it won't affect the model space being 1-to-1. It only affects annotative objects in the view of this space. So 2 different ways to do text. 2 different measurement styles, one referring to our paper printed size and the other talking about a 1-to-1 environment. It's weird. You might never understand it this year. It might click another time. It took me a couple years. All right. So when you're reading through your homework then, you have to pay attention to these kind of changes, like is it in 1/2 inches and fractions? That's most likely talking about annotative. Now I want you to try, you have to make both notes types and you have to try and execute both notes to label things. What I say in the requirements is you're going to use your scale factor chart to use your printed heights. You must do the floor plan text using the scale factor and annotative notes. For all the other plans, you can use the heights given and convert the correct inches measurements in the model space. Make sure all fonts are City Blueprint before beginning and rename your standard text to be notes. So for the floor plan, that's the first one. These are each your separate plans. So adding text to floor plan, adding text to reflected ceiling plan, section, and site plan. For the floor plan, you must use annotative notes. And this year I tried to make it clear as possible by putting use note annotative here. So you're perfectly set up to do that in all of these situations because I've given you the fractional annotative scale. So if we want to add notes to our floor plan, like pipe chase, we're going to use 1/8 inch as the height with our annotative scale. So coming back into there, we already have that little piece drawn. So I'm going to turn off our labels so you don't get confused by those. But we already had one of those drawn. One of them was annotative and one was not. When I double click on this one, I can see its notes. When I double click on this one, I can see its notes annotative. I'm going to check that in your homework that every note on the floor plan is notes annotative. And it has to be in order to be right, regardless of if this is the same height and it's notes. So it has to be notes annotative. I'm going to delete this out and then I'll pull this guy up into position up here. And let's pull up his completed text plan and all our crazy mess, if we have it. Floor plan, okay. So we could see the text that we need are both of those pipe chases, pipe chase, pipe chase. So we know the logical thing would be to take this and copy it down and put it in here. So we've got it twice. I'm going to turn off her extra dimensions as well. So we're just cleaning it up a little bit. And really, there's a secret about this plan, right? The floor plan's not the furniture plan. They're two separate plans. So in the end, she's going to have to get rid of some of this furniture. But for this week, we'll see what we can get it down to be appropriate because we'll create another furniture plan in the following and turn off more layers. So we've got pipe chase and pipe chase. Don't forget, in my videos, I'm a little loose with me controlling my layers because I can be, but you would probably want these to be on a label layer. And they're fine to be on labels because her labels are representing labels that would go with the floor plan. In the future, we'll have labels that go with the furniture plan. So she's okay that she has these labels on, and they actually go with her project. So I have them, I've moved them to labels. Then, besides that, she needs to have this one, which is text and a multi-leader, and this one, which is text and a multi-leader, and this one, which is just a label with an underline. So let's focus on this one, which is something we've learned how to do. And we'll go back out to our assignment instructions. It says pipe chase we've completed using notes annotative. Floor plan is 1/2 inch height, notes annotative. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go to annotate. I'm going to make sure that my current text style is notes annotative. And then I'm going to use multi-line. I'm going to come under here. I'm going to graph my box. And I'm going to change this height to be 1/2 inch, enter. And then I will type floor plan. And now I could also see there's at this time, absolutely, there's so many things you could do with text. I like to underline each of these, and reflected ceiling plan should be as well. So pay attention to little nuance like that. If something's italic, underlined. For this week, mostly just underline and uppercase are the things you need to concentrate on. So I'll have my floor plan text. Floor plan is like one of those words where there's an English version and there's two different ways you can put it together. You can have it apart, but it really should be apart for the majority of the times. I'm just used to doing it, the splicing together. All right, so we have this. You want to be thinking about cleanliness, so I strategically place these things in, like I said, justification with the end of the building because it looks prettier when I go to print it. So if I go to home, I can always move my text to be in better alignment with my building, and to be similar from plan to plan. So right now I'll go back and underline this one by clicking underline. I'll delete this out for now. And then I'd say, okay, I want it in a similar spot for most of my plans. That might mean that I pull it down, and that's just for the cleanliness of presentation purposes. So here's floor plan, pipe chase, pipe chase. It's all annotative text for this. You could technically do anything else on the rest of the plans. So you could, but you have to match the heights. So you could use notes, notes annotative. If I decide to use notes, let's say, which plan would have any little notes that are left over? I don't even know that we have too many that aren't associated with a leader. Really, most of your baby notes are associated with the leader, or we've done them. So pipe chase, pipe chase. The other option is to just use plain notes. So this reflected ceiling plan, for instance, it could have been plain notes. Again, if I want it to be plain notes, it can't be annotative and it can't be half. So I would have had to say annotate. And when I looked at my homework for the reflected ceiling, I'd say, it says it's half height, but I don't want to use annotative notes. I just want to use notes. So if I go back out to my scale, I could say, I know my reflected ceiling plan is 1/4 of an inch, and I know that its annotative height is half. So that's going to be 24 standard note size. So returning back, we could come in here and change this to be notes, multi-line, click, click, 24 inches, and reflected ceiling plan. Select the text or have already selected underline and click. So that's where I'm saying any other plan, you could choose to do these labels for them, the site plan, the reflected ceiling plan, by going back and converting it in the chart. But you have to do annotative for this plan. Then we have to learn how to do a leader line. So if I go into, we've got annotate open, I have my multi-leader. And right now I just have a standard leader. We're going to manage our leader style, and we want to adjust it so that it has a similar font to it. So we're going to modify it, and we're going to come into the content, and we're going to change it to be text style to match our notes. So we use this, notes is representative of our note style that we set up for our standard multi-line text, and we know it's non-annotative. So it's going to match whatever text type is used there. And we're just going to click OK, because we're okay with its arrow size, we're okay with it being closed and filled, and we're okay with the font that we've decided on. And then we're going to set it current, although it's the only one, and then we can close. So if I go to use my multi-leader, it functions now like a notes text would function. So if I look at my homework assignment for my floor plan, it says low brick wall should be an 1/8 inch height, multi-leader with text. But a multi-leader is the only thing that is non-annotative. And that's the only thing, and I'll make it clear, that I won't deduct a point on for being non-annotative because it's a special device. So it's okay if this is non-annotative, now that I've scared you about annotative things. And there we go. Correct myself because I can't help myself. And we'll scroll down and save. So we're saying for our floor plan text, it's a leader line at an 1/8 of an inch height. Well, I have to do the conversion then if it's non-annotative. So I'm going to come into my scale and I'll say 1/4 of an inch for an 1/8 inch text height is going to equal 6 inches. So I'm going to go back out here and I'm going to continue. So I'm going to say, this is what I'm pointing to. The first click is always the object. I'm pointing to this low brick wall. And then the second click is, this is where my text will begin. And then you've got to choose your size in the upper left-hand corner. And we said it's going to be 6 inches. Enter. And we're going to say low brick wall. We'll see if we can get it to be right. 24 foot. Now this is a good mistake to have happen. Somebody had said on my last video, my recording of this from a previous year, this happened to them. They typed 6 up here and it defaulted back to a different size. If that happens, you can just highlight the text when you double click back into it and type 6 inches, enter. And we got to get this guy too. So I'm going to undo so that I can really catch it all, because I wasn't zoomed far enough back. There we go. Select it all, do 6 inches, enter, and left click, and it should be okay. Although I left the L in wall, so you get it. Highlight blue, make your correction, and you should be good. And your text is on a node, so it'll all work out. Let's do it one more time so it's not so wonky. We can go into home. And we go into, oh, you can also get to your annotation in here. So like here's your leader and your text. I just like to go to the separate tab. So I could come into here, into leader, and draw things or text. But I'm gonna go into annotate my multi-leader, come to the middle of the wall-ish, click. We'll try it again. And let me see what my drop down is. Let's click, you can also click 6 inches. Let's see. Low brick wall. There we go. So that works, but just in case, if it didn't, and we wanted it to be 8 inches, we said we could select all this and do 8 inches, enter, and I make it bigger. Left click off. Okay, so it should be 6, but it's easy to click and change things except for how I messed up the little first part. It happens. And it's good to know that I'm human too. So we'll do 6 inches and put it back. And that should match up with what I was seeing in my PDF. So I'm going to close out of this, and we'll look at this. So low brick wall looks like the right size, pointing to the right spot. Now let's just examine what about over here? We've got a down arrow. And how is this text sitting atop the arrow? Well, we can put things together sometimes to create things that work for us. So if I tried to, for instance, we said we've got text going one way in that situation. I almost wish I could have 2 screens open. Text going up, arrow going down, text sitting on top of an arrow. I might kind of minimize it and scroll over, and then minimize this just a little bit so I can easily toggle back and forth in between these. Okay, so if I'm going to create that and I have a multi-leader, we can create a multi-leader by clicking. So I say, here's an arrow, and then I click, and then I just click off. And now I have an arrow that I can move just like an object. So I can move it here. I could select it again. I could copy it. I can do whatever I want. It functions like any other object. And if I take its little node here and I pull it in or down straight with the object, I can make it almost disappear. And if you get it just perfect, you can get it to disappear. So it takes a little play with it, but as long as it's gone-ish, okay? So we get rid of our arrow so that we can use it as a functioning arrow. We wanted to know the steps go down or up this way, so we can rotate our arrow all the way around like this. And then we could put our text in just as a multi-leader text that's rotated up and put alongside it. So I could grab my annotate tab, make sure that I'm in, really for this part, since it's on the floor plan, we said we have to be using our annotative notes. I make sure it's set. And then I could check back here with my assignment. And for my multi-liter text, it tells me for the down is 1/8 inch height, which we know is 6 inches. So I'm still set okay. And I could start some text. So if I come here and I say it's at 6 and DN. Now, this is good because it keeps having this weird thing. I love these oddities of AutoCAD. So it's annotative text. I'm going to change it to 12 and then I'm going to change it to 6 just to see why it's not working. Bum, bum, bum. Notes annotative 6 inches. Should work for us. Oh, silly me. You know what it's. Nobody said anything. I love you guys. All right. 1/8 inch is the same as 6. So I was using notes, normal notes. So it has to be fractional because it was notes annotative. So then I could rotate that going home, rotate, text rotates just like objects, and moving it into alignment with our arrow. I might turn off my snaps so I can get it without it wanting to snap to the end. But that's how we create that text so that it's facing that odd direction, because our multi-leader would prevent us from allowing text to sit above like that. So we just constructed it using a multi-leader line that we didn't type on and normal multi-line text. Then we can move it right into place on our stairs over here to match up with our PDF. All right, let's look at our initial multi-leader here where the text was connected and see how it functions. If you have this, you can grab the node and pull it anywhere. You can pull it up, you can pull it down. You can pull it over and stretch it out. You can pull it this way. If you take it all the way this way, woo, look at that, that's magic. It becomes an arrow to the other direction. This little direction change blows people's minds, and every year they wonder how I got an arrow going that direction. So all I did was cross an axis so that it switches its own direction because the tool is intuitive like that. So nodes, up, down, left, right, and crossing an axis flips the direction completely. All right. So that covers our whole floor plan. There's some nuance to this as far as when you're looking at this blank floor plan. This is what I'd expect of someone who's only in my class, this emptiness with the labeling on it. And if you wanted to, whatever walls you got in for this week, just purely hatched, okay? And you could have doors, but it wouldn't look like what Lillian's is because hers is specific to her own personal plan. And really, I just need the shell of it, even without the walls, and we could add and work with the walls in the future for the people who are only in my class. But you want your walls in general, hatch solid, and your labeling on it that has to be completed for the next week for a floor plan. For a reflected ceiling plan, we want to have these labels. So it's a continuation of looking back at how we apply our notes. How could we do this dropped beam under at 10'6"? What sizing is that? I could go out to my assignment and say reflected ceiling plan, all text except plan name, 1/4 inch multi-leader label. So if I go in to my reflected ceiling plan over here, I could grab my leader And I could start by putting an arrow down. And whenever it says multi-leader label, you have the ability to use your leader, which you said is based off of notes. So if it's based off of notes and it's saying it's all a 1/4 inch multi-leader label, we have to go into here and say 1/4 at 1/4 inch is going to be our 12-inch height. So I would make sure this is at 12 inch. Right now it's at 12 foot. So I would have to type a new one and say 12 inch, enter. There we go. Oh, cute. It changed it to 1 foot. All right. So looking at what we want our plan to say, dropped beam under at 10 foot 6 AFF. Whew. Dropped beam under at 10 foot 6 inches AFF. And AFF means above finished floor. So I get my note in here. And then let's look at its orientation. So we said it's rotated sideways because the notes are red wrapping around the plan. You could have it if you want to. I wouldn't be against turning it another way, but we've got to move this arrow by pulling it across the axis if you want it to look like it did in that picture. So I just pulled it all the way over and adjusted it. And I get it to look similar to this. And let's see how many layers of text. So dropped and beam under. If I went back into my text and I space, it looks like under, down. And like I could pull at back. It'll help with it to fall closer. You can also move text forward and backwards, giving yourself more line space in here, drawing this node up and down by left clicking on it until you've got it very similar to the PDF in placement. All right, so there's one of your notes, and you've seen multiple ways of how you would read through your assignment. If it's fractional and it's not on the floor plan and it's a multi-leader, we would go and use the conversion scale for those items. And the same for other text. So we're just adding the text that we see on each of these plans. It'll say the label, or it'll say the leader, or it'll say text. And then you can open up the PDF and see what a completed PDF would look like. Okay. So I'm going to close out of the rest of the PDFs, and I'm going to let you work through that in your homework if you have any questions. And I'm going to look at my notes really quickly to see what else I have to share with you tonight. I think we're mostly good. So as long as your plans match my plans, the last thing I want to do that I might reopen CAD. So I'm going to save this on my computer because it won't affect Masara on her computer. And I'm going to close out and see if oh, I have this here. Perfect. It finally popped up. That's so strange. So when I was trying to do the building section earlier, oh, it is a 2018 thing. That's sneaky. You saw how when I was in the model and then I had this here, I was hoping to have that in here. It's usually showing up here. So I'm guessing I have to do this my own way this year. So if I come in here and I double click, I can move this up and down. I still need this to be at, I want to say 1/4 inch scale because it's matching up with my plan. So if I come in and I put it at 1/4 inch, then I'm going to adjust my viewport so that it's not so ginormous. I'm going to just grab it by its nodes and slide the nodes towards the building itself without cutting any of my building off. Then I'm going to rotate my viewport and I'm going to move it into the center of the screen. So I have my section drawing I'm just going to confirm with my notes that that's the size that I want it to be at. So section equals 1/2 inch height, and all of the plans are 1/4. And then the site plan, let me add to my notes and have you pay attention to the fact that it is the only one that is not 1/4 inch in size tonight. So if I come down, I said use the scale chart for 1/4 inch drawing scale, except for the site plan, which is 1/8 inch equals 1 foot. Okay, and let's even put it here. 1/8 inch equals 1 foot, so that you remember it. Okay, and then I will save it. So we have it now rotated in here. But if I go into my model, notice it didn't affect that at all. It was just a way to control what I'm seeing and get it to be normalized as I view it on my building section plan. So if I wanted to add its label in model space in here, I could have the label be rotated in underneath it and include it in that viewport, for instance. And this is sneaky. I wish I wasn't doing this on the screen right now. Notice I'm copying some of these. You can't do it through the floor plan, but if I copied it, and I know it's that all the labels are at the same size, and I move it in place, and I have site plan, underneath it, and I can move this up. And we said we're gonna kind of align things right in here. Then if I come into the layout that I've done for, or not site plan, you guys are letting me do my own rogue thing. And I come in here and we say section. Then I could get it all in, including the label at 1/4 inch, and lock it. So I have everything in one spot inclusive. So you're just working through all your plans, you're looking at the text sizes, you've got your reflected ceiling plan in, you'll get these labels. How about a label with a double arrow? That's one that we're missing. So if I look at the labels on my reflected ceiling plan, this one, the slope has double arrows and the peak has 1 arrow. So if I was going to do a slope text, and I believe it's all at 1/4 inch. So reflected ceiling plan, scroll down 1/4 inch, which means that size 6 text. Then I go into annotate, and I want to do my multi-leader. So if I have my multi-leader, we know that 1/4 inch equals 6, and multi-leader standard notes, so it'll be that 6-inch measurement. I'm going to point firstly to a spot like here, and then start my text, and I could say slope. Now I'm going to show you, this might be the way to show you what goes wrong with this, with the more multi-leader where we have 2. It's not going to look as pretty if you do it this way, okay? So if I do slope and I select it and I make it 6 inches, you can always have one arrow, but you're like, how do I get the other arrow and get it to work out? Well, we can pull the arrow down straight here. Okay, it does work out good. So that's how we got rid of our little foot just then, by pulling it 90 degrees like that. And now I don't have a little ugly foot like I did with my down over here. So I could have rotated that differently. But then you can always add a leader. So if I click add a leader and click this and pull to the left, it plops the second arrow in there. Then each of those arrows is its own guy that you can move individually by nodes once you've added it. So I could rotate it in place, home, rotate about its center point, and then we need it to fit. So we're going to have to use our nodes. We don't want to lose our arrows. If I pull too far, I'll lose it. So without losing an arrow, How far can I go? It looks like this big. And then on this side, we've got to fit it into, see if I can get my arrow to come back. There we go. So I kind of like adjusted this down, and then once I adjusted that down, I pulled it until the arrow reappeared for me, and that kept getting it smaller. And it's just a lot of clicking until we get him to be the right size. And we'll see if it's gonna work in place. Now, if it doesn't fit, this might be why I was gonna tell you the other secret that I had. So that's to get 2 arrows using it, but it's just jammed packed and it doesn't wanna fit with the slope space that I have. And no amount of actual clicking without changing the size of the text is gonna remain my arrow. So adding an arrow works like that when you have a multi-leader, so you can get 2 that way. Or I can use my single multi-line text. Right now it's on notes annotative, so I would want it to be a quarter because it has the annotative symbol. We said that's the same as 6. So if I said 1/4 inch, enter for notes annotative, and we said slope. Okay. 1/4 inch. And we rotate it. Home, rotate into place. Still seems big to me. Now let me check that I'm right. 1/4 inch multi-leader. I'm going to try it bigger, and then I'm going to try to make it smaller and see if it makes it any smaller. It seems kind of big to me, even though it says it is not. Must be 1/8 then. Maybe that's the only problem. I'm sorry that I'm finding some of these mistakes in real time, but it's good to know and to find out this semester because no one was said anything last. So all text on the plan, 1/4 multi-leader label. It's just missing those things. We'll say except slope, which should be smaller according to our PDF. So if we go out and look at it, we could say for reflected ceiling plan picture. Nope, slope is big like that. So I just had it different. Okay, so I didn't lie. I was right. Okay, so here's my slope at 1/4 inch, but you can't have 2 arrows that run into each other like the slope arrows that we're showing with a leader line. So what you have to do is then take your leader and do the little click thing and click off. So you get 1, and then you can copy it and you can rotate it. Boop. And you can align them into a place with each other. And you can then move these as close or as far as you want with each other. And you can rotate them like this and move them above or below your slope line so that it matches up with the PDF. So it just prepares you to deal with issues in text and kind of improvising with using text that stands alone and text that uses a multi-leader. Although you can do really cool things like adding an added leader to your multi-leader. So we'll pull this up, and it should go from edge to edge in here, and then slope is like that. So it all works out, and it is the text sizes that it says on my original instruction. Okay, so let's see. Any questions about how you need to do something because you're in space planning or not in space planning? People in space planning, technically, I want you to turn off as much junk so that you get it down to look like this. So we'll turn off equipment for her and appliances and bathroom cabinets and so on and so forth. An A-fern and ceiling and deck will keep. Ooh, that's a good question. I bet I turned it off. Okay. And then we can turn off our labels for this week, although they'll come back to haunt us in a little bit. Equipment, fixtures, furniture. You can keep your staircase on. That would be fine. But you want to get rid of your cabinets just for this week. And then in the future weeks, we're going to go over how to do some layer management so that we can toggle certain parts of our cabinetry and labeling and everything off, because we're going to have our floor plan be under and integrated with our furniture plan. So just, I want to look at more closely like the plan that I'm asking for my 108 only students, and have it be emptier. So just make sure you turn it off. You can keep all the layers, but turn them off so that they're hard lined like this. You do want your windows and doors on. So it should match the PDF as far as what's showing on the plan. Those are way down here.
Sorry, did you mean for your 115 students?
Yes, that's what I meant.
Okay. Awesome. And then are there more than me that are not?
Yes, there is.
Planning?
And Angie is not in space planning. And I think I have one other person who's not.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'm not in space planning either. It's Ashley.
Okay.
Hi, Ashley. Okay. I'm like
Yeah.
definitely, I'm just gonna obviously have to rewatch this because I'm struggling to like, just looking at a plan that looks so different from mine. I'm struggling to just, follow this basically.
Yeah. So the only things like for you, or even if you want to incorporate the walls that you had, Michelle, is that you make sure you have walls on, doors on. So like this would really look like your floor plan, except then it needs to have the text this week that I had, minus the cabinets and the furniture. So walls and doors and windows and labels is pretty much what I'm getting at.
Okay.
And then for the reflected ceiling plan, we don't see doors and windows, etc., because they don't touch. So even,
Right.
and what this brings up a great point actually. So for you guys, once you get in here, sure, it could be true. Like I have a bathroom and I kept the slope ceiling, and then I have this room and I kept the slope ceiling. So it could still look like this with a slope. But what about like doors that aren't exterior doors that are interior to my plan that don't touch the ceiling? For a reflected ceiling plan, you need to do this for me. So good. I'm thinking now like a student. You have to close off interior doors. My plan doesn't show them, but you just close them off with empty blocks like this because we wouldn't see them. We would see the top of the framing. And if you feel so led, you could hatch them with the same type of hatching, but you have to close them off because we're not taking them into account, and you would not have the door swing. So I went from something that looks like this to saying this plan cuts off at the ceiling, so I don't see these openings, but I want to recognize them as being there. If I really wanted them to match everything else, I could say, okay, it's a framed opening, so I could use that ANSI size 12 hatch and go through and fill in any doors, even closet areas where the framing takes place. So we would end up filming in our pocket area like this, pocket, and we could have a solid frame because that's what we're cutting over with our plan. And then we could do our hatching for any of these areas to be like this, and any wall, we're just going to pretend it's not a pocket at this point. We're going to say, oh, but that's wall and drywall above the pocketed spot. So we could do that as solid hatching to both sides. So I could say, and make sure you're on the right layers when you hatch. I'm trying to give you the conceptual, and I would hatch through all those doors. The only exception is openings that don't have doors with swings. So if you had a closet and you were saying it's not framed, you know what I mean? Like a monolithic opening. So if I pull up my SketchUp and I said, this door cuts into a wall. But if I had a situation where I didn't have a door, but I had a fully, like a hole cut out in this wall, so it's just an opening all the way to the ceiling, then I could leave it open and it would look different in my plan. So if I came in here, for instance, these walls are open to the ceiling. Or if I came in and I was going to draw in a closet or just like a cavernous space that I could walk into is pretty much what I'm getting at. It's like you left it open and it doesn't have a frame in here, then that's fine. You don't have to close that off. But if it has a physical frame that a door is, even if there's not a door hanging in it, you have to close it off by hatching it on your reflected ceiling plan only, because the cut line's above that.
That makes sense.
Okay.
I remember that from Cheryl's class, actually, something
Okay.
like that.
So, go
I
ahead.
just have a potentially kind of stupid question.
Don't care.
Remember when we were practicing text like a couple weeks ago or whenever it was?
Mhm.
So it was just like, just put your text wherever. Do we need to get rid of that? Like,
Yes.
okay, that's what I thought.
Unless it pertains, like when I said put your text whatever, the text had been like labels, like what we were seeing for Lillian in here, and those will eventually be turned on her floor plan, because we do show that on a floor plan, the sizes, the areas, and labels that go along
Yeah.
with it. So if you had those, you could technically leave them on, because we will turn them on eventually. I guess I wouldn't be too upset with that. But we wouldn't have the kitchen triangle. You know what I mean? These are the things that would show
Yeah.
up on a floor plan.
Okay, so like I think when I was looking at mine last night, when I just did like text wherever, I think it turned out that in my kitchen now it says master bedroom or something like that.
Okay,
Just
so
because
yeah,
it was like,
move them into
yeah.
the right places, and I would totally allow leaving them on because they would exist in our floor plan.
Okay. And I am just going to totally triple check here that I do not need, or like us that are just in this class don't need the square footage stuff.
No, you don't need the square footage because we're not concerned about you finishing a floor plan.
Okay, awesome, thanks.
You're welcome. Although it's really easy, you use the area tool. You go area, type, 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 and then you get a click, click, click where you want your area. Sometimes let's see if that still works in this
Okay.
version. Area, I want the area from here to here to here. And then I finish it off and I say enter. And then it says that was 175 square feet. You see what I did there?
Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be a sad math thing. It can be a really fun thing. But
Yay.
do you got any more questions?
I don't think so.
Okay,
Yeah, I have a
you.
so
question.
who is it?
Me, Allison.
Oh,
Oh.
Angie. Okay. Sorry, I couldn't see you on there. Yep, go ahead.
So, okay, so like, where we did those one labels like Michelle was asking about,
Uh-huh.
like she said her kitchen's like says master bedroom. Do
Uh-huh.
we put all this stuff on labels or a label layer, or what do we do?
Oh, good point. So like let's say we're on reflected ceiling plan. You could have the reflected ceiling plan on every label we create today can go on labels, but then we're going to create some labels in a later week for other plans that have to be turned on and off. And then at that time, those will go on a different one. So yeah, any text could go on labels this week. It would be fine for it to be
Okay.
that way.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Another thing I'm providing you with at the bottom of this is drawing standards, elevations, perspectives, and drawing standards. And these are for kitchens and bathrooms, because in reviewing your files, I didn't comment on it because nobody asked me for my opinion from your class. If you ever want it, I'll give it to you. I do grade it secretly in my mind on your space planning. But they're more presentation standards of how to draw elevations from when I taught the NKBA class, and how to think about kitchens and bathrooms. And you can have this even if you're not in space planning, just to save to your desktops for the rest of your life, because I don't think I'm supposed to give these out, but I do anyway, because you need them and they help you think. This just tells you everything you'd ever want to know about NKBA standards and examples of the dimensioning styles and the labeling. Some of you I met with privately this week, and I said, oh yeah, we'll have little labels. You'll have the cabinets labeled, and then you'll have the call out for number 7 is a base cabinet, and it explains what's going on there, or if there's a dishwasher, and here's an elevation marker, and just some good basic drafting things. Or here is, I want to say, a demo plan of a building, right? So we can look at what's a new wall and what's a wall to be removed, existing, so on and so forth. And the downloadable versions would be clearer to read on your screen than what you're seeing on mine. A mechanical legend, this will be invaluable to you, as we will be drawing one of these for our kitchens and our bathrooms later. Thinking about center lines. And then if you keep going, again, it has elevations and drawings. And drafting, good drafting, so visible lines, hidden objects, center lines, and how to see those things on plans and examples. This is probably like one of the best PowerPoints I've ever been handed as I was working here, so I like to share it with you for your review. Another thing, I'm going to give you my opinion because I have someone's file open right now. I'm going to close out of it, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute. And if you want to leave, you can leave, because it's going to keep recording anyway, and I don't care. But if I open up, so I'm going to go back out to my internet, and I believe I've stopped sharing my. I looked at your kitchens and baths, and the biggest thing I want you to understand is the integration of parts, and that a toilet, a sink, and a bathtub should not feel like these 3 random, very spaced out elements existing within space in your plan. And a lot of you like put a tub in, and imagine in your houses, for the most part, except for decorative tubs like with a claw foot, you have a built-in surround, be it that's tile covering drywall, covering a wall stud, so on and so forth, where they've built that ugly tub base, which is pretty once it's walled off on 2 ends, into the room. Or they have extra rooms for a toilet, so the toilet's not hanging out on its own with 5 feet to each side, and so on and so forth. And it just, I think it's a disconnect mentally at this stage of the game in what's really happening in space, because you don't have an elevation and you don't have a good 3-dimensional handle on it, and you'll realize how ugly it is and just like empty it feels when you do have a handle on it. So
Do you mean like not putting, sorry to interrupt you, but do you mean
yeah,
like if you had a bathtub that was on one wall and then the foot of the tub, like, so the faucet is on the wall, but then the foot of the tub, we haven't put like a wall to block it
yes,
off? Okay,
yeah.
that totally makes sense.
And so like here's an example. So this was Masara's before I turned everything off. And so if I look at her plan, this looks pretty good, especially because I know this is the ADA bathroom. So I get why there's a lot of emptier space in here. Sometimes there has to be in order for rules to be that way. But when I zoom in, like there's a gap in here. And so we've placed the block's the right size, and it makes sense to what we're doing. But the reality of this is there has to be an enclosing of this. Otherwise, we're going to have a hard time dusting for the rest of our lives to get back in this crevice that we've created for ourselves. So you could do 2 things. You could add wall in here and you could hatch it out. with the solid wall, not your tub because that's silly, but this piece right here, and say here the wall is doubly thick to make up for this extra portion. Or we could say, I clearly know she's thinking smart and saying, is this accessible? And yes, it is, but we could scale her object by exploding her. Oh, that's awesome. They'll let you explode her block. She could scale her block or explode it and stretch it and then make it a block again. So if we exploded it and we just like moved portions of it in order to get it over to that wall, and once we do the move of this piece, then really we could technically just like move this piece and so on and so forth until it's appropriate, and then we can make the block fit, and then it's not awkward because that big gap in between the wall, that just isn't usable space. And then if we look down here, so this too, this is weird right here because I bet this is a lovely thing, but I don't know if this is based off of a real thing that Masara has done a lot of research on, and I don't know the style of her house. So say that this is some type of romantic style where it is curved like this, but this is an awkward space in here. So if she wants to have some of these lovely curves, and this isn't like a fully freestanding lovely thing that's tiled on all sides, and even if it is, this is a lot of awkward space. So we want to come up with some way where maybe we maintain the curve, because drywall can do these kind of things, or extra tiling, or she creates a physical bench that's tiled that attaches to the side, so somebody could be sitting here, and then we put a rod on the wall here to hang towels that this person could grab very easily coming out, but we filled this space and added usability and have this. I know we're all in our pre-planning stages, but this is a ton of space, and it doesn't meet with requirements for bathrooms as far as the center line of the toilet to a physical wall to grab toilet paper. We could put toilet paper next to it, but it's not in line with accessibility. So there's just tons of rules. And it's kind of strange, like the closing off of this with this. So is there a better way to arrange it? But she's got all the elements she needs. They just feel disconnected and it's not polished. So I want to make sure that everyone in this class that's in space planning, and not to pick on Masara because it's hard to understand when you're not looking at it three-dimensionally, and you'll get there, is really thinking about not just the basic blocks. Get all the fancy things in there. Get my little towel rods in there. Get any extra floating shelves. Get in the trash bins, the things that fill the space. Get them in there. Check that you are meeting up with your codes. If you have any questions and you want to check with me, you can. Or if you want to double check after the meeting with, I bet maybe Professor King's already talked about this, okay? But I have some students who aren't in that class that I want to think about this too. So like Michelle and Angie. Make sure it's not just fitting the requirement at the minimum. And maybe that requires some talking to with somebody who has a better understanding about space. And maybe we'll get there when we get into the SketchUp. So I think it's so much easier to think about a bathroom and think about a loft area and my high roof. So this is just my ugly file that matches up with my drawing file, but I've made it so that you could see, oh, there's the kitchen. And once I get the kitchen three-dimensional like this, someone said, I didn't put the cabinets like you had them on your plan in the video because I didn't want to block the window. Well, I didn't either. So I had built a lower area that she could have a small office space where she could be working in front of that usable window and also use her kitchen space because she's an author, and who wouldn't be reading and writing in their kitchen, right, when you're an author? So it's so much easier to look at it this way than when you looked at my plan view and maybe thought, oh, I can't use this space. So see how she didn't put any uppers? That's perfect, that she shouldn't have. But like in here, Masara, if I can, are you here? Are you really here? I would say like something in the corner space over here. I don't know what's happening with that cabinet and why we closed off the back of it. Or in here, there's no leg space coming off of the countertop, and that's a really easy two-dimensional error to have. Or some of you have islands and you put cabinets back to back and didn't think about having to have room in the middle for plumbing of any type, or having to have an extra ledge of 18 to 12 inches for people to sit out on one side, and they can't just butt up against that either. So our two-dimensional, three-dimensional changes are things that, those are the kind of questions I'm looking for to be asked in my class as well, not just technical questions. And if you want a second opinion, I'm willing to give it to you, but I have to know that you want it, because if you don't want it, I'm not going to waste my time giving it. But tonight, I think it's helpful to see this, like a bathroom, and think about walls, think about where we have to finish off a wall in here, because that's a good drawing practice. Just continue a block to a wall, reset the block. Little things like that. All right, so with that said, any questions?
I don't have any questions, but thanks for kind of going over that. That's definitely where I was struggling just from being only in this class. I was really trying to, I felt like overthink stuff like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was good to hear you go over that. Thank you.
you're welcome.
I do actually have a question.
Yeah.
So you notice my countertop lines are not dashed, and I did make them dashed, but every time I save them and exit out, they become solid again, and I don't know why.
So great question. Miss Sarah, you're totally fine. All you have to do is type regen, REGEN, and bam, magic.
Oh, wow.
I am magic, let me tell you. And so it's AutoCAD, any type of dashing, any type of hatching makes AutoCAD say, I'm going to run slower. And so that's AutoCAD optimizing the speed for your computer and saying, I'm going to ignore this for now, but if you want to see it, you can type regenerate and see it. But by having it default back to that straight line when you're not using it or showing it on a paper space, it's saving you the memory and processing of your computer.
Okay, this makes total sense.
Okay?
I was getting nervous because I was like, I don't want to submit it and then get points off for it.
Nope, you're totally fine.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, let me do a little test here, because this is something we didn't get to talk about, and you wouldn't notice it until a later week, maybe, when we come into the problem. So sometimes paper space functions different than model space. So if I come into here and I look at it, see how it's straight in here? And even if I come into here and I type regen, see how it's straight in here? And so you're like, I want to print it. And not only is it not straight, but look, it made the dashes like ginormous in here.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to set a change. Let me check at what it's at in here. Double click, so escape. It's, well, actually, double click out. So in paper space, I'm going to type PSLT scale, and it says it's set to 1. Now hold on, don't do this yet. I'm just going to see. I'm going to set it to 0, and I'm going to do it in here too. So double clicked in here, I'll try it. PSLT scale, that means paper space scale, 0, enter. Okay. And then I'm going to go into my model and I'm going to say LT scale. And I don't want it to be 12. I want it to be 1. Oh, I see what happened. Okay. So this might be, when you did these lines, you set it by layer, and we set it to dashed. You didn't change its line type scale because you set it by layer to dashed. So you didn't do them individually, right?
At first, I did them individually, and then I was like, I might as well just make a whole other layer, and it'll save me time. So
Okay.
yeah, then later I did a whole layer with its own. Yeah.
Okay, let me check something then. So if I do, I think, did I pause the recording? Does it say it's recording, and can you guys tell if it's recording?
Yes, it is recording.
Okay, thank you. All right, so LT scale. Let me do it to 12 again, because that's what it was defaulting to. 12. So your dashes come back here. If we go in here, okay, then it would print. So it's like we have to refresh our LT scale. I just want to make sure, because we're going to have to draw some lines later. Did it change this? No, it's all working. Okay, so it should just, when you have issues with it and you come in here, so in here, we're gonna type LT scale, enter, and for you it looks like 12. If anyone else has trouble with this in the future, let me know. Say my dash lines aren't showing up in Paperspace, and we're gonna take it by an individual basis because it's a finicky thing. Then it should show up like this. Whereas before it didn't want to. We kind of have to refresh it in our model space, in our paper space to match that. So the LT scale, just type it again in your model space, make sure it's regenerated, and it should show up. So if anyone has problems, we'll see. Maybe next week we'll spend more time on it, but I just wanted the basics, and that was a great question. So anyone who has been questioning where their lines are going knows.
Yeah, because even like the grip bars I have in the shower, they just disappear or they look weird and crooked, and I just don't know why.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm open to any other questions. And again, I'm open to understanding how drawing is being interpreted too. Just let me know. And it says, I've got some people in the chat. Amanda said, she'd like my opinion if I'm willing to give it on her space planning, and I will do that. Okay. Feel free to go home, or I bet most of you are home, and have a good rest of your night.